So before I want to address that the issue of the comparison to Hasidut, and you spoke about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and where do we find parallel lines between Hasidut and the Sephardic Jewry? So first of all, it's interesting that the Nusa, the prayer Nusa that the Hasidim follow is the Sephardic Siddur. Also interesting that you have certain questions where Hasidut and Sephardi Jews are on the same page. Such, for example, using non-Jewish tunes in liturgy in the synagogue. So Sephardic Jews did it always, and it was in the time of the Ramah that this became a debate in Halakha, and the Ashkenazi Jews also dealt with that question, and almost unanimously, all Ashkenazi rabbis who are not Hasidic say that you're not allowed to adopt tunes from non-Jewish sources and use it in the synagogue because they have, pagan or non-Jewish origin. Whereas the Sephardim say, not only that they say you could do it, but in the book that I quoted before, Krach Shel Romi, that is called by Rabbi-Ovadia Yosef, he writes about one of the great rabbis of Smyrna, who used to go to the church on the holidays to pick up new tunes. He would not sit there openly. He says, Mehorei Pargod. He would sit behind the curtain, maybe in the confession booth, that nobody would see him. But that was done. And in Hasidic Judaism, it's exactly the same. All music is kosher. One of the Hasidic rabbis said, "Musica lo mekabelet tum'ah." The music cannot contract impurity. And if you go to and now it's sort of like spilled back into the Litvak Haredi world, not in the synagogue though, but at weddings. If you go to a wedding, to Haredi weddings, be ready to hear tunes from when it was Lambada at a certain point and Genghis Khan, which played in the Eurovision, that people adopt. It was disco, and then so if today you have even what do you call? There's some rap and there's samba. There are different styles. So this is something that started with the Hasidic world. The idea of unity and acceptance did not start with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. That started with Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov was the one who broke the mold of the Ashkenazi community, where people were labeled and stratified, and in many cases they were labeled by the level of their scholarship. In the shtetls in Europe, it was traditional to have synagogues that were attended by people according to their level of knowledge. So they were what they called chevra. You know how they say today, chevra, mashlomchem, friends. It actually comes from the Hebrew word in the Sephardic pronunciation is hevra, which means society or community, and in the Ashkenazi pronunciation is chevra. So they had a synagogue of chevra shas, chevra mishnoyes, chevra tehillim, meaning the society of those who could study Talmud. They pray in that synagogue. The society of those who study Mishnah, they pray in that synagogue. The society of those who cannot study either, and they could only read Tehillim, and they pray at that synagogue. And then there were the ignoramuses, those who couldn't read at all. And there are so many stories about them in Hasidic literature. If you go back, to the first generations of Hasidic literature, of Rabbi Levi Yitzhakov Berdichev, of the Dubna Magid, the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov goes in the forest, and he speaks. And the Rav Nachman of Breslev speaks about the song of the flowers and of the grass, of a song of creation. And he sees, of course, in every human being, he sees that. And then you have a story of the famous story of the kid with the flute, right, or the whistle. Depends on who tells the story. Who comes into the synagogue in Yom Kippur and he doesn't know how to pray, and he takes out his whistle and he blows, and everybody wants to to punish him, but the rabbi said, let him go. He penetrated the heavens because our prayers were not going up. Or the story about the men who sat throughout Yom Kippur saying Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, up to Yud, and then would tell God, that's what I know. Please take my letters and make your own prayers because I can't say more than that. And the rabbi said, I think it was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, the story is told about, he said his prayers were better than the prayers of all of us on Yom Kippur. All these stories came to teach people not to judge each other based on their external appearance or their knowledge, more about their heart and personality. There are many, many Hasidic stories like that, and they're beautiful. Unfortunately, what happened in the Hasidic movement, within a very short period after its establishment, it went in the same direction as the general Ashkenazi community, the Litva community, and started splitting into courts and sub-courts. Each rabbi had 3 followers, each follower had 3 children, each children had disputes, and now you have hundreds and hundreds of Hasidic courts. So what happened with, as I said, with the Hasidic movement, that unfortunately it splintered so fast and became divided, with one faction not talking to the other faction. In some cases it was 2 brothers of the same father, like there's a Karlin Stolin Hasidut that after the father died, half of them went with Karlin, the other half went with Stolin. It's they're a dynasty in Israel, Krechnev, that got split. The Krechnev Rebbe of Rehovot and the Krechnev Rebbe of Petah Tikva, and each one of those is 20, 30, or 100 or 300 followers. And of course there are the big ones like Ger and Belz that have tens of thousands, but it was not the vision that Rabbi Israel Bar Shem Tov had. When Rabbi Israel Bar Shem Tov started it, he wanted everyone to be equal, no matter how you look, no matter how you dress, no matter what you study. But very quickly it became, I only talk to you if you are if you follow the same rabbi, dress the same way, etc. Now the Lubavitcher Rebbe is a different story, and the interesting part of the story is that up until his 40s, he did not consider or call himself a rabbi. His education was that of an engineer, was an electric engineer, I think. And when he migrated to France before the war, he was still registered in the phone book of Paris as Engineer Schneerson, and not as a rabbi. Later on, when he moved to America, he married the daughter of the 6th Rebbe of Lubavitch. And when he migrated to America and he lived near the Rebbe, people were attracted to him because he was charismatic. But everybody was sure that the leadership would pass after the passing away of the Rebbe, of the 6th Rebbe of Lubavitch, would pass to the other son-in-law, Shemar Yagur Aryeh. And that did not happen. And when there was a battle between the followers after the 6th rabbi died, and eventually Rabbi Schneerson prevailed. Probably it helped also that he had the same last name as the dynasty, because it was like a cousin or something. But I think an added element was his charisma. Now,
he was a direct descendant of Zalman of Liadi.
Yes, right.
His first rabbi.
Right, which for the Hasidim is extremely important, because they believe in that. It's like royalty. But I think beyond that, it was his charisma and the way he connected to people, and the fact that he was steeped in the secular world. Unlike, and that's where I see also similarity to Sephardic great rabbis. He knew people in the real world. He understood where they are, what they do. He was well versed in other languages and sciences, and he brought that knowledge with him into the Rabbanut, and he also looked for solutions that were maybe not Orthodox, but he made them Orthodox. So it's interesting to see what he did with the hair covering for women, because he had the same problem as Rabbi Mesas. Same exact problem. Orthodox women in America did not cover their head. I don't know if not many people know that, because when you talk to the Orthodox women today, everybody thinks that historically it was always like that. I know from sort of a witness. My Rabbi Mayarnik, was born. He passed away, but he was born in Uruguay. During World War II, his parents escaped from Europe to Uruguay, and then they came to Israel. And he told me that his father told him that between the wars in Europe, you would find maybe one or two women in a community in the city that would cover their hair, and it would usually be the wife of the rabbi and the wife of the shochet. The rest of the Orthodox women did not cover their hair. And the same thing was in America. Same thing was even in Israel when I was growing up in the early 60s. It was still a trend of women, a lot of Orthodox women not fully covering their hair, not wearing long sleeves or long skirts or etc. But that has changed. And in America, the main factor of change was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. What he did, he understood that a head-on collision with women is not going to work. If he's going to go after them and say that they are not Orthodox, not religious, or immodest, etc., it's not going to work. So instead, but he would not accept the solution of Rabbi Mesas that they don't have to cover their hair. He believed very, very profoundly that they must cover their hair, and he even believed in the Kabbalistic traditions that if a woman doesn't cover her hair, she brings disaster to the world and all stuff like that. What he did, he launched a different campaign, and his campaign was convincing all women to wear a wig. So other Orthodox rabbis at the time said that the woman must wear a hat or a scarf, to call it a tichel, right, or some kind of a hair cover. Among the Hungarian Hasidim, women even had to shave their hair completely and then put a black scarf on top of it. Those who would wear a wig would wear a very, I would say old-fashioned, like something that clearly looked like a wig. Definitely didn't look like natural hair. Now, Rabbi Schneerson, the Rebbe, understood that if he wants the women to accept what they're saying, he has to find something that will be likable by them, and therefore he not only ruled that they could wear a wig, a modern, good-looking wig, he actually made it a condition. When young couples came to him and they said that they wanted him to officiate at their wedding, he made it a condition that the woman will wear a wig after the wedding. And in many cases, people would say, we cannot afford a wig. I mean, those are the 50s, harsh times in America also. He said, I will give you the money to buy a wig. He had a fund, and he would give people money to buy a wig, and he actually insisted with people to buy two of them. So she has one for weekdays and one for Shabbat. And in a book, there's a book about the hair covering in general. When someone is, there's an interview. There's an interview with a wig maker, a famous wig maker in America. She says that she got a phone call from the Rebbe in the 60s or something, and he said, "Get ready, order as many wigs as you can because you're going to have a big business." So he teamed with with the people who actually were producing the wigs to do that. Now, that was his smart move with all the things that people at the time considered as immodest, like, as I said, short sleeves, short skirt, even pants. He went for the hair covering. Why? He could have said, okay, they're never going to cover their hair. let's just ask him to wear, let's say, long sleeves or something like that. No, it was wise in the way he operated. He realized that the moment a woman covers her hair, she sees herself as Orthodox. And if she sees herself as Orthodox, then naturally all the other things would follow in terms of modesty, and she would also marry someone who leads an Orthodox lifestyle, and with that he succeeded. There's no question, he succeeded. The other thing that he did that was pretty visionary is the idea of shlihim, that he would take people and send them to communities all over the world. But the rule that he gave them was, you never leave. You're not there for a year or two and then you could go wherever you want. No, this is your new place. It's like putting someone on a desert island and burning the boat. That's it. There's no way out. You have to make do where you are. And in those shlihim that the Rebbe appointed created dynasties where they are. Their children, the whole families became part of the community and got integrated. Today, the work today in a different way. It's not for this discussion, but he was able to bring the rabbis or the Judaism to the community instead of remaining aloof. Those are the similarities between the Hasidic movement and the Sephardic world. And I don't think that he would have been able to have such a vision if he was not educated with secular education at his youth. And because of that educational background, he was always also able to bring technology into Lubavitch. You could say that Lubavitch is the probably most advanced Jewish organization in the world in terms of technology. And probably they have the largest educational system in the world, or at least religious educational system, because they're all over. When I was in Bogota, 91 to 96, I remember that in 92, I had a discussion with a good friend who worked at the embassy. And at the time, 91, 92, calling Israel was not a simple thing. You had to have a special plan. Today everybody has a plan or a card, but back then it was complicated. It was like really, you had to dial an operator and get the special code, and then to get it with a good price, otherwise it would be a fortune. And the other way to communicate was through letters. We sent letters to Israel constantly. And then this friend in the embassy tells me that in the embassy they use something called internet. That was before the wide world knew about internet. He didn't call it internet. Maybe he did. Anyway, he says we have a method, like through the computer we send messages to Israel. I said, it's beautiful. So I mentioned it to my friend, the rabbi, the Lubavitch rabbi in Bogota. And he says, oh yes, we have that. We use it among the Lubavitch houses in the world. It's called Lubanet. They were using the internet in the early 90s, before anyone even understood what was going on. So this is really way ahead of the curve. So those are the similarities. But on the other hand, there are serious problems with the movement. One problem is that as inclusive as it is, it's inclusive to a point. The shlihim, the representative of the rabbi, wherever they are, still maintain a very distinct appearance. They do not blend in. It's a long coat, it's the untrimmed beard. The women usually are more orthodox, more modern, and more they blend in better, but the men stand out. Same with their treatment of women in terms of women's status. Women are highly regarded, but only within their framework. A woman could give a lecture to men or something like that, but not within the synagogue. She still have she has a designated place, etc. Also, the interesting thing is that as open as they are, and I'm saying, have to be careful not to make generalizations. Depends on which Lubavitch representative where in the world, but in general, they are very open towards secular Jews, but not towards religious Jews, because with the religious Jews, like we have a different ideology, so they do not want to associate with them. So because their brand of Judaism is the right one, and an interesting example was with my good friend in Bogota, who he would invite us over either to his house or to what is called Casa Lubavitch, but would never come to our house for a meal. Not me, not the other rabbi. And we asked him one time, "Why don't you come?" He said, "I always get invitations from my congregants, and if I come to you, I'll have to come to them, and maybe I trust you, but over there it's not kosher." I didn't buy that. I felt that he had to keep the other rabbis at bay. That is one problem. The other problem that people are not aware of is that Lubavitch is anti-Zionist, basically. Not anti, but not supportive. The Lubavitch movement believes, actually you could say anti. Lubavitch movement believes that the state of Israel, the establishment of the state of Israel was an act of heresy, that is a defined act against God. And Rabbi Vital, you're surprised, and you see it on your face when you hear that. But
because that's not how he's presented in the book.
Of course.
Though it does say that the rabbi never visited Israel.
Right, in the book, I guess Telushkin wanted to keep it, play it safe, because if he would have revealed it, it would not, the Lubavitch movement would ban the book. He wants, he needs to sell also. Same thing you will find.
He also talked about the Rebbe's insistence that the dealing of land for peace is not going to be
Yes,
and is going to
right.
lives.
But that's from a practical point of view. He accepted the fact that the state is established. And now that the state is established, he wants to care for the Jews who live in it. He's not going to say that they all, deserve to die or anything like that. He's against returning territories. But think about it for a moment. The Rebbe never visited Israel. How strange is it? So the Hasidim came up with an explanation. They said that had he visited Israel, Mashiach would have come right away, and the time was not ripe. That's apologetic. Another
sort of excuse is that he shouldn't go to Israel when there are still people needing him in the diaspora.
Yeah.
No rabbi should leave their congregation
Yeah.
to Israel when there's still congregations in the diaspora.
Right, but nobody said that he should leave forever. He could have gone and come back. Right, and another weird thing that you realize that Lubavitch in Israel never participated in the elections as a party. They had such influence in Israel. If they would have presented their candidacy, they would have mandates and influence. But there was a line that they would not cross. They would not get into the. Now, when I say that it's a problem, it's not a problem because they have an anti-Zionist stance. Because people are entitled to have their political views. There are other Orthodox Jews who don't accept the state of Israel, and there are non-Orthodox Jews who are not in favor of Israel, and each one is entitled to his opinion. It's a different discussion. The problem is that it's sort of a hidden agenda that people are not aware of, and that's not fair. And so when I told it to one of my friends, and he said, "Wow, how can you say that they're the most supportive of Israel?" I said, "Go to your rabbi on Yom HaAtzmaut and ask him if he was willing to say Hallel in the synagogue to celebrate, with Hallel and prayer, the establishment of the state of Israel." So that I think is we deviate a little bit to talk about the Hasidut and modern Hasidut, but there are parallels between the Hasidic movements in the beginning and Sephardic Jews, and also with Lubavitch, modern Lubavitch, more than other Hasidic movements in modern times, but as I said, there are still those areas of exclusivity and lack of willingness to adapt to changing reality. So let us return briefly to Shapiro's article, and I hope that we'll have time next week to go over some of the luminaries of Sephardic world, modern Sephardic world that I wanted to speak about. So we're going back to Mark Shapiro's article, and he spoke about the concept of limud zechut. He says this: the most radical of Messas's attempts at limud zechut also relate to Shabbat observance. This time, The issue was people were carrying on the Shabbat. And he writes, it's not something new, it was a big problem. But carrying is something that halakha is really obsessed with. Recently, I've been teaching, if you listen to my audio classes, I've been teaching Mishnah Shabbat and Ilchot Shabbat, and I also wrote about this. And the interesting thing regarding carrying on Shabbat is that it occupies most of the discussion in the Mishnaic literature. So I wanted to quantify that. I wanted to see how much, because usually I would tell people, there are 24 chapters in Masechet Shabbat and 10 chapters in Masechet Eruvin, which both speak about Shabbat. So in total, 34 chapters. Out of these, you have about 15 chapters that deal with carrying. But since the old chapters are not of the same length, I wanted to see exactly how much is dedicated to each category of Shabbat. So I counted the words. I created one file with all the text of Shabbat, and it comes to about 9,000. All the words in the Mishnah that speak about, in this two Masechtot, the talk of Shabbat, are about 9,000 words. Of these 9,000 words, about 5,000 are dedicated to carrying on Shabbat. Carrying meaning taking from what is called private domain to public domain and carrying within the public domain. Meanwhile, only 600 words are dedicated to deal with all other works that are considered biblical works. So, complete disproportion. And it's interesting that the rabbis are so obsessed with the issue of carrying, but because there was so much text in the Mishnah, there was also much more text about this specific work, carrying, than any other else in the Talmud, in the consequent halachic tradition. Rabbi Mesas' justification, he's relying on another important Rabbi Haim Ovadia, who lived in Algeria. Also, most people don't even know of him, but he was a great Talmid Hacham. He's mentioned by many scholars who were his students. And he lived from 1832 to 1919, also in Tlemcen in Algeria. And he said there's no need for an eruv in order to be able to carry on Shabbat. And Shapiro adds, to say that this is a radical position is an understatement. Right? Based on what I just told you of how much attention is dedicated to the laws of carrying. The way that Rabbi Mesas argued that, he said that the eruv, that string that is put around the city to make it one property, is only necessary if there is an entity called public domain. But if you don't have an entity called public domain, you don't need that. And he goes through and he presents the reason. He says today, the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo says in one place that there's no such thing as public domain in our days. And he says if there's no public domain, there's no need for eruv. He goes to a certain argumentation. The interesting thing about that, and I don't think he brings it here, is that immediately following that, when he mentioned that it was in the 1950s, when Rabbi Mesas suggested that when he suggested that you don't need an eruv to carry on Shabbat, another prominent rabbi in Morocco, I think it was Rabbi Verdugo, wrote to him and said, I heard that you said that you could carry on Shabbat even without an eruv, or that an eruv is not necessary. How can you say that? You are the only one who says that. The way Rabbi Mesas replied was, he says, if you join me, we will be two, and then I won't be alone, and then we can convince other rabbis to join me. So basically what he was saying, you have to take action. I think he really understood the plight of the Jewish people, of the observant Jews at the time. What he spoke about in his, when he wrote the justification of going that way, he said that he sees that people carry anyway, and it's a problem. for today, when I look at what is happening in Jewish communities, especially in America, but also in Israel and other observant enclaves, the problem is that the maintenance of the eruv is extremely expensive, and that when you have harsh weather, sometimes the eruv can be damaged. The strings or the poles can be damaged. And I heard from people who, came to town for a bar mitzvah and were not able to go to the synagogue because just before Shabbat they announced that the eruv is down, and they had to go out either with the walking sticks or because it was snowing, it was stormy, whatever, and people were trapped at home. People couldn't go with strollers, and that is not what Shabbat should be about. Also, in many communities, there is the eruv, to build an eruv, because it's expensive, so it could only surround a very limited area. So everybody wants to live within that area so they could carry as they walk to the synagogue. And as a result, the real estate go up, the prices go up within the eruv, and some people cannot afford to live there. So it's a whole series of problems that could have been prevented had people adopted the approach of Rabbi Mesas. I'm saying Akum because I'm looking at the next paragraph. He says another example of a rabbinic decree that he thought was no longer relevant today, and which could therefore be ignored, was that of Bishul Akum, food cooked by non-Jew. This was a decree in order to prevent assimilation. But reflecting his time and place, he argued that there is very little assimilation, and it's not because of eating non-Jewish cooking. So this is an interesting halakha I also wrote about. If you want, I'll send you the article on that. The rabbis forbade Jews from eating food cooked by non-Jews, but they said specifically because of the fear of assimilation, and that was limited to eating at the house of a non-Jewish friend who would serve you the food that he cooked himself. They say you cannot eat that food unless you cooked it with him, or you stirred the pot or something like that. But even when, in the original halakha, when it says non-Jewish, it only referred to pagans and not to non-Jews in general. So today, in our time and age, first of all, we don't look at other people as pagans, whether they're Christians or Muslims. And Muslims were never perceived as pagans, because their religion is the clear belief in one God. Whereas in some, depends on which branch of Christianity you look at, you could see the belief in the Trinity or the existence of statues as some form of paganism, but even that was rejected by the rabbi. Said it is not, for a non-Jew to practice Christianity is not paganism, so there should be no problem with eating the food. But also because of the change in the way we consume and produce food. When the decree was made, there was no such concept of a restaurant or commercial food. You would eat either at home or at friends, but you couldn't go to the store and buy pre-cooked food, to go, or Shabbat meal or anything like that. Today, our food is prepared by people that we don't know, we'll never know, and there's no fear of assimilation or any other thing like that. So Rabbi Mesas says we have to move on with that. And I think we've seen many examples where Rabbi Mesas is really very progressive and forward-thinking in the way he understands the need of the communities, and how to make halakha accessible for them. So that is. We didn't read the whole article. You could read it online. You could go, analyze more. But the most important thing, I think, is all the halachic rulings of Rabbi Sass that we already have reviewed. And God willing, at a certain point where it will be possible, maybe to print his stuff, his writings in Hebrew and in English, that would be fabulous. Hopefully, down the road, somehow we'll be able to do it. Let's stop here for a second and take questions. Maybe we'll, after that, I'm going to go back to the issue of the Sephardic identity in Israel and speak about the brain drain of the Jews of Morocco. So one more article that I wanted to share. We already hinted at it, when we spoke about when we read the article of Nissim Leon. This is an article that I couldn't get the English version. It was written by Lupo. His first name is Yaakov or Yosef Lupo, and he speaks about the brain drain of Morocco. He says that yeshiva institutions in Europe, in America, and in Israel absorbed students from Morocco without the intention to sending them back and teach in institutions in their homeland. It was, people were tricked. They were told, we'll train you, we'll send you back, but they were not. And he brings an example of Rabbi Yehuda El-Kayam, who was he was the principal of the girls' seminary Bet Yaakov in Tangier in 1957, and then he became the president of and the head of Otzar Torah in France. Otzar Torah, literally the treasure of Torah, is a network of schools in France. And Rabbi El-Kayam, a friend of mine, was also involved working there in the 1990s. It's still active. So Rabbi El-Kayam, right here, he was born in Casablanca in 1928. 1951, he's 23 years old. He was studying in Paris, electric engineering. He met Rabbi Kalmanovich. Rabbi Kalmanovich was recruiting for the yeshivot, for the Ashkenazi yeshivot. Since 1951, shortly after the Holocaust, the leaders of the Ashkenazi yeshivot, the Litvak yeshivot, realized that most of them were annihilated or decimated in the Holocaust, and they need to bring new people in. And by the way, there was a greater connection between the Jews of Morocco and the survivors of the Holocaust, as people know. First of all, the Holocaust touched North Africa, Tunisia mainly. It didn't make it to Morocco. The king of Morocco told the Nazis that he's going to fight against them to protect his Jews, and the Jews of Morocco are still grateful to the king. Was it Muhammad V? Or Hassan V. Anyway, also I know some of my congregants were recruited after the Holocaust by a French Moroccan doctor to come to France. He taught them physical education, and they became instructors for Holocaust survivors. One of them told me the story. His name was Michel Asaraf. He passed away last year at the age of 93. Amazing story. He told me how he spent 4 years in France training or rehabilitating survivors from the camps. And I just couldn't try, I'm trying to visualize that sight. Young Moroccan boys from Fez who, were trained by a French Moroccan doctor working in France to bring back to life and to physical ability people who came from the camps. Just in this interesting encounter. Anyway, Rabbi El-Kayam went to study in Gateshead in northern England between 1951 and 1957. I'll tell you about Gateshead, by the way. An interesting thing, when I was in Israel and I was in yeshiva, I heard a lot about Gateshead. I also heard a lot about Lakewood in America. So, and I always imagined, this is the center of the yeshiva world in England. It's called Gateshead, and the center of the yeshiva world in America is called Lakewood. So, in my mind, there were great cities, maybe not like New York and Los Angeles, but maybe something like Yerushalayim, with like some kind of a metropolis. When I first visited Lakewood, I was quite disappointed. It's like almost in the middle of nowhere. If you know New Jersey, there are two main thoroughfares that cut New Jersey. It's the New Jersey Turnpike and the Garden State Parkway. And Lakewood is between the two. None of them reaches Lakewood. It's off the beaten path. And it's surrounded by other cities and villages of completely non-Jewish population. And of all the cities in the area, it is of the lower economic status. And then I spoke about it with a friend whose father went to Gateshead, also Moroccan, and his father went to Gateshead, and he says, "Oh, Gateshead is basically a miner's town." He says if you walk the streets at night, the only lights that are up are in the yeshiva building and in the pubs. And that was part of the ideology of the heads of the Lithuanian or the Litvak yeshivot, to set them up in places that where the students would have no temptations, and where you could really tell them you are the elite of the intellectual world, not just the Jewish world, the whole world. Because look at the non-Jew outside, right? Look at him. Look at how he lives. And he goes to the pub. And look at you. You have a wonderful life. They knew that if you place those yeshivot in Manhattan, in other places, they would be too tempting. That's why in LA also, if the yeshivot are sort of like closed off within the. They're very, very tight about protecting their boundaries, and even from Lakewood, some people felt that it was too exposed to the world in general, and they went to the upstate New York, founded an yeshiva in the Catskills. My son went to the yeshiva. It's in a place called South Fallsburg, which is funny. I visited the place. When I heard South Fallsburg, I imagined a town with, some 25,000 residents at least. You have South Fallsburg, you have West, or North Fallsburg. It's exactly, the South is a couple of houses. It's just like out of nowhere. But that's part of the mentality. Anyway, so he went, all that I'm telling you because he went to, this Rabbi Al-Qayyam went to study in Gateshead, and there were many Moroccan students, to the point where they called it the French colony. There was another yeshiva in France called Aix-les-Bains, but in a city, Aix-les-Bains, but they called it Hachmei Tzarfat, the scholars of France. Those rabbis, those students spoke French well and had academic background. In 1953, Rabbi Waltner established an educational center in Tangiers. Tangiers is sort of like an international city. It was part of Spain for a while, and he invited the students from Gateshead to help him as teachers and rabbis. But the students who were in Gateshead said, "We're not interested. We want to just study Torah. We are not interested in being teachers." And that's absurd and I would say even preposterous, because they came from Morocco to the yeshiva, and you would have thought that the greatest incentives will be to go back to their hometown and teach other people. But that's part of the mentality of the Orthodox, so the ultra-Orthodox world, that is very, very self-centered. It's like in some of the Eastern religions, the nirvana, the spiritual enlightenment that you achieve is most important, and not how to help others. And it's funny because within the community, people help each other, but to reach out of the community, go somewhere else, is considered a danger, or you're going to be contaminated. It says Rabbi Rafael Baruch Toledano, who was the chief rabbi of Meknes, visited the gates and tried to convince people to go back to Morocco. He explained to them that when they refuse to go back, they're abandoning their brethren and therefore endanger their spiritual and educational future, and maybe they will go into assimilation. And Rabbi Al-Qayyam was the one who agreed to leave the yeshiva and go back to Morocco, but he was the exception. He only did that after he consulted Rabbi Soloveitchik, Yitzhak Zev Soloveitchik, that's the ultra-Orthodox branch of the family, who visited the yeshiva and gave him his blessing. But Lupo writes also that when Rabbi Kalmanovitz came to Morocco and he did all these recruitings of the students with such rush and urgency, created a commotion in the community. Rabbi Abu wrote a letter to Rabbi Kalmanovitz. He said that he was afraid that the government will get involved, and maybe he would even be put in prison. Maybe they even twisted or banned some rules when they did visas and all that. Lupo writes this: Ma'arichet Hasim, that the relation between Rabbi Kalmanovitz and Rabbi Abu was done in a way that the first one was very dominant, and it was basically controlling the local rabbis, telling them what to do, not giving them really authority to do. So it's to me, when I read this, it's just another like mini facet of imperialism, like coming to a country, from a Western country to a North African country, and taking the resources. So some countries took jewels and diamonds and fuel and cotton, and other people took brains, and that was really not right. So Rabbi Raphael Abu found the most talented Bnei Torah, the most talented students, and sent them to Gateshead. Rabbi Abu wrote a letter to Rabbi Yosef Shammah, who was helping Isaac Shalom, who founded the Otzar Torah. He says, and he praises himself for being a graduate of the Ashkenazi yeshivot, and he says this: "אינני רק חניך, אלא למדתי בישיבות גדולות של אשכנזים ויודע איך מנהלים ישיבות. ואם יש ספרדי הלומד בישיבות אשכנזים, נזקף על חשבוני." He says he prides himself he says, I didn't just study in the Ashkenazi yeshiva, but I'm part of the system. I know how to run an Ashkenazi yeshiva. If you find any Sephardic student in an Ashkenazi yeshiva, it's my doing. I'm the one who made it happen. And he says this the נטייה הזו של הרב אבו מאפיינת רבים מהרבנים הספרדים המזרחיים בעולם התורה הליטאי. Many of the Sephardic or Mizrahi rabbis who are part of the Lithuanian Litvak world of Torah feel there's some kind of an inferiority complex, that in order to feel proud, you have to say, I am fully integrated, I am as Ashkenazi as they are. Though they felt the patronizing approach and the Ashkenazi arrogance in the yeshiva world, they never stopped admiring that world of Torah and always aspired to be part of it. And that is very true. I see today with my friends who grew up within this world, and when I say, what about our Sephardic heritage, our the way we studied, they brush it aside. I'll end with the story that even now, I'm thinking it's so funny. Years ago, when I was in yeshiva, I was 18, 19, I went to yeshiva, and I used to be very meticulous about the pronunciation, especially because there were many Sephardic students in the yeshiva, but the style and the leadership was Ashkenazi. At least when I was leading the prayers, I wanted to keep my pronunciation, and the Iraqi pronunciation is very, very noted. You hear it, like in the tefillah. I would say het, tet, tha, va, qa. It's like guttural words. So, for example, if I say Asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah, right? In my pronunciation, it would sound like that. Asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah. So, one of my friends who grew up in the Ashkenazi yeshivot of Moroccan background comes to me and says, "What is this pronunciation? You sound like an animal. This is so guttural. This is not good." Okay, so I can argue with him. One day we had a rabbi, an Ashkenazi rabbi, who visited in the yeshiva, and he was known to be a grammarian. Besides his knowledge of Torah, he was also very, very strict about grammar. So I remember it was during the Omer, and he says the bracha on Sfirat HaOmer, and he tried as much as he could to say it with the Sephardic Havara, because he believed that is the right one. So, and it's hard for someone who is not his mother tongue, he didn't grow up like that, to say it. So it was like, Baruch atah Hashem, asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Sefirat HaOmer. So after he said this bracha, I went to my friend, and I said, "No, what do you say to that? Now you have an Ashkenazi rabbi who said that." He's like, "Yeah, but when he does that, it sounds good." So, and this, very early on, I realized that you have this. As long as it's done, it's not only there. Everywhere, wherever you have a sort of a dominant world and one which is being dominated, you always want to aspire to look like the other, and we don't. And what we need to do, what Sepharadim need to do, is to realize their own potential and heritage and knowledge. In that context, I recommend reading a book by Franz Pennon. It's called Black Skin, White Masks. He speaks about the French occupation of islands in the of the islands, and how they treated the people with different color skin, and a lot of those things can relate to the Ashkenazi Sephardic conflict. Okay, we'll conclude with this today, and God willing, next week, which is our last session, we speak of some about the great rabbis that I mentioned here: Rabbi Abdallah Somech, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Oziel, etc. And then we'll wrap up everything. So that is all for today.